easy. Right, guys. What a week it's been. What a fucking week it's been so far. Yeah, had a terrible week this week. Basically, company I work for sold off the building and assets that where I work at, and we're being forced to relocate, so that's always fun. Lots of people resigning, leaving because they're not able to relocate, yada yada yada. So I've had to deal with that this week. Thought this would be a good week because I've got like 9 days off now. I booked a week's holiday. I thought weather's going to be nice. Big UFC card tomorrow. Got a trip to the arcade club planned with one of my buddies. And, bit of R&R, rest and relaxation for the next 9 days. It's going to be great. But then obviously all this shit with work has happened. Throwing mine and 90 other people's lives into turmoil. Nothing we can do apparently, because there's just nothing we can do. And then when I was going home from work last night thinking, great, shit situation, but at least I've got a week off. I looked under the car and I've got a fucking fuel leak coming from one of the fuel pipes. So that's something I'm going to have to do this week as well. So I thought, there's a new Spider-Man film out. I'm going to go and cheer myself up and watch a film that, should cheer me up. Did it? Kind of. A little bit. Yeah, so I'm a little bit late to the party because it came out the other day on the 2nd. But Spider-Man Far From Home, the sequel to Spider-Man Homecoming, the kind of continuation of the final phase of the MCU. This has actually been kind of spoken about as being the actual end of the third phase of the MCU, not Endgame as most people had assumed. In the same way that Ant-Man was the end of what phase was that? That phase. Those kind of films are a little bit lighter in tone, and just meant to be kind of like palate cleansers after the big, obviously finale of Endgame and all the previous Avengers. There's always like a film that's meant to kind of like cleanse your palate, wipe the slate clean, and say, that's the end of that chapter, and now we're on to what's gonna come. So yeah, I don't really want to get into the story elements of it too much because obviously it only came out the other day and I don't want to ruin it for anyone who is interested in going and seeing it. So what did I think of it? Well, it's a little bit hit and miss, I'll be honest. The first act, or the setup of the film, feels very long and drawn out. And it takes a while for it to actually get moving. I mean, it does a lot of groundwork because it's trying to explain, how the kids in the film were affected by the dusting at the end of Infinity War. Explain why some of them are older and some are younger and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of, giving a little bit of exposition around that, and then setting up how the characters are, moving forward with those kind of changes. Obviously Peter is dealing with the ramifications of what happens at the end of Endgame. I am going to talk a little bit about Endgame, so spoilers ahead for Endgame, but not for Far From Home. Because let's face it, if you haven't seen Endgame now, you're not really that interested. It's the second biggest film of all time. So if you haven't seen it now, to get it spoiled, so click off the video now. So Peter's dealing with the aftermath of Tony's sacrifice at the end of Endgame, and there is weight and expectation on his shoulders because he has been anointed, so to speak, by Tony as being the one who's going to carry on and be kind of like Earth's mightiest hero and defend the planet, with him being made an Avenger and all that kind of jazz. It's interesting because these aren't really spoilers because it's in the trailer, but the scene that you see in the trailers for Far From Home, where Peter's foiling like a bank robbery and he's throwing some shade at the cops there, saying, "Oh, I can't be the next Iron Man because I'm too busy doing your job," and all that kind of stuff. That's not in the film. There's a lot of stuff kind of like in the trailers that hasn't made it into the final cut, which is a bit of a shame, because the film does feel a little bit uneven in places. Like you can certainly feel where they've taken the scissors to certain scenes to kind of jig things around. They mustn't have been happy with how the story was kind of like, shaping, and that's always kind of like been something that when the Marvel films get things right, they actually feel like the stories feel whole and complete. When I feel like the Marvel films tend to falter is when they are casting an eye a little bit too much on the future films, trying to keep an eye on the story that they're trying to tell in the present, and then they realise, oh, that's not going to work in 2 or 3 films' time, so we're going to have to trim this here and move this around there. And sometimes it can make certain films feel a little bit disjointed and a little bit messy at times, and I feel like that is a problem that I could level towards Far From Home. It is a little bit messy in places, especially in the first kind of half of the film. The first act kind of overflows into the second act, and it feels, well, a bit boring, if I'm honest. The characters that you want to see interact don't interact all that much, because they're too busy trying to move this piece over here, we're going to introduce this character, reintroduce these characters here, and then introduce some characters that really have no bearing on the film moving forward, and then they disappear and all this kind of stuff. But once the film actually kicks into gear, and then around about the halfway point, something happens in the story, which, if you know the film and if you know the comics and you know the character, the characters, I should say, specifically Mysterio, if you know those characters from the comic books, you kind of know what's going to happen. When I saw the trailers, people were like, "Oh, Mysterio's this, Mysterio's that. He's from another Earth, and he's, it opens up the multiverse, and it nods and winks at all of that kind of stuff, and the multiverse, and there's nice, Earth 616 reference and all that kind of stuff. But I always felt like I knew exactly where this story was going to go, and I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking that. Just because of the nature of Mysterio and his character. And I've got to say that it was a little bit disappointing that everything I thought was going to happen happened. However, what I did quite like, even though it proceeded as expected, I did quite like motivations and the reasons behind what happens. That happens in the film. So that was quite nice, because in the same way that Homecoming kind of tied Michael Keaton's Vulture, Adrian Toomes' character, into the MCU, they kind of do this. It doesn't work quite as well in this film, I feel. It doesn't, quite have a neat interlock as what Homecoming did, but I did like that certain characters that you haven't seen for ages make a reappearance, which is good. It's nice, kind of like, you know, fan service in a way. They don't really, you know, do all that much, but it's interesting to see how side characters in, like, as early as Iron Man, side characters in, you know, the original Iron Man film, and moving on, they have quite clearly had a life after that film and continued on. So even though we haven't seen them for, you know, over 10 years, they've been, you know, the wheels have been turning behind the scenes, and shit's been happening behind the scenes, and that kind of comes round in this film, which I liked that a lot. Jake Gyllenhaal plays Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio. I'll be honest, I never thought I would see a film or a Spider-Man film with Mysterio in it. I honestly didn't think we'd ever get to that point. I thought Sony were too preoccupied trying to build their Sinister Six like Spider-Man film, which they're still trying to do with, you know, the backdoor Venom bullshit that they're doing. I still think that they want to get there, but I never thought that Mysterio would have been like the headline guy in a Spider-Man film, and it was really good to actually see him in there. Jake Gyllenhaal, actually, I'm kind of torn in a way, because I like Jake Gyllenhaal. I think he would have been, he could have been like a bigger part of the MCU, if you know what I mean. He could have been a bigger name than just being Mysterio. And that's not to diminish Mysterio, because I know he's got his fans out there, and he plays him really well. I like what he does with it. He's likable, and he kind of fits into the role really well. And there's a charm about him in this film, and it fits the character of Quentin Beck really well. I liked what he did with it. So, and he looks amazing, even though obviously there's moments where it's like, that's CG. Obviously, you know that's CG because he's flying around and he's got the fishbowl and all of that kind of stuff. But the look and the design of his character and the execution of his suit is fantastic. It really is. It's bang on, absolutely bang on. Nick Fury and Maria Hill show up in this film, so the former agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. have a presence in this. And as I was watching the film, I was kind of like, for the last couple of films now, I felt like Sam Jackson has been doing, well, is it really the last couple of films? I think it was mainly at the point where he was in Captain Marvel, and I felt like this doesn't feel like Nick Fury anymore. You know, there was a certain moment in the MCU where Nick Fury stopped feeling like Nick Fury, and I didn't know if it was down to Sam Jackson getting to the point, because he's like 71, 72, you know what I mean? You don't think he's that old, because he doesn't look that old, but he's getting up there in years now, and I just thought he got to the point where he was kind of like, this is just an easy paycheck, I don't give a fuck, and he's just doing what he wants. And there was a sense of that with like Nick Fury in Captain Marvel film. That's why I wasn't that keen on Captain Marvel, because I felt like they were making him too much of a jokey character, and they were just explaining it away that he was green and a young agent and all that kind of stuff. And I'm thinking, there's only really 20 odd years difference between when we see him in Captain Marvel and when we see him come back in like the Avengers, and he's the badass of all badasses in like the Avengers onwards. So that kind of didn't really gel for me with Captain Marvel. It was just one reason out of a plethora of reasons that I didn't really get on with that film. All gender politics and all that kind of stuff aside, Brie Larson just being a really annoying cunt. How long's this video now? 15 minutes. I think that's I've done well there. I don't think I've said cunt up until the 15-minute point, but anyway. Yeah, we've had it twice now. So, so I did Nick Fury. Yeah, so I didn't know if Sam Jackson was like kind of just phoning it in, taking the piss and taking the paycheck, or whether it was a conscious decision to actually change the character. It's one of those things. What I will say is stay until the right to the end. There's a mid-reel stinger and there's an end credit stinger, so right at the end. So there's two scenes to stay for, which kind of changes the whole dynamic of what we think we know is going on at the moment. It's given me some other questions as well, but I can't really chew those over on this video without giving spoilers on the film, and I'm not going to do that at this point. So I may leave it a couple of weeks and discuss that with Lee on the Untitled Film podcast, because I know we've seen the film. So I might talk about that in a couple of weeks on the podcast, and just kind of air my thoughts out there about these questions that these extra scenes at the end of the film kind of pose. Tom Holland is really good again in the role of Peter Parker. He balances that kind of awkwardness with kind of the confidence really well. He's confident when he needs to be as Spider-Man, and he's kind of awkward and nerdy when he isn't Spider-Man and when he's Peter in certain kind of social situations, which, he's good. He fits really well into that character. He's likeable. He does have a good natural kind of charm and screen presence, but he needs someone to bring that out of him sometimes. And now that we no longer have Robert Downey Jr. for him to bounce off, with that kind of father-son mentor role that they the dynamic that they had in the previous films, John Favreau has kind of like been thrust into that role. Happy Hogan makes a return, looking after Peter, getting pretty close with Marissa Tomei and her version of Aunt May. Marissa Tomei is aging like a fine wine, boys and girls. She looks amazing as always. Just a shame that she's not in this film more than what she is. Real shame, because I could, just, yeah. Anyway, where was I going with that? I got distracted by Marissa Tomei. What it is she's got a pair of tight jeans on. Well, they're tight in the right places, if you know what I mean, but they're kind of like flared jeans, very 70s style, and the camera kind of lingers on her as she's walking away from the camera. And anyway, so let's move along. You've got Zendaya coming back as the MJ character from this universe. Again, she has a real nice kind of chemistry between her and Tom Holland in the scenes that they share together. One of those things that I really wish there was a little bit more of, because those are the character interactions that I mentioned before that I wanted more of, that you don't really get all that much of in the first half of the film, because the film is that busy trying to set everything up for the end game of this film, as it were, forgive the pun, that it kind of eliminates the wrong word, but it kind of, something has to kind of like fall by the wayside, and unfortunately those character moments that I want between those two disappear. What's his face? Jacob Batalon? I don't know how he pronounces his surname, but he's back as Peter's best mate, Ned. He's starting to get annoying. I want less of him in the next film. I really do. What I want more of in the next film is New York. I want Spider-Man swinging around New York, because this film predominantly takes place in Vienna, Prague, and London. And I know probably one of the reasons that they've done this and they've, kind of like broadened the scope out for that is because we've had now 5 films, 5 Spider-Man films where we've seen Peter Parker, Spider-Man swinging around New York, and they're probably thinking we need to broaden the horizon, show Spider-Man in something like in different environments, so people don't just think it's a retread of what we've seen before. So I get that, but I want to see that in the next Spider-Man film. I need to see because towards the end of the film, we do see Spider-Man swinging around New York, and that is exactly where he needs to be in the next film. So, yeah, I mean, I know they're not going to see this video, but it's one of those, it's like, as a fan of Spider-Man and growing up with Spider-Man, I need to see him in New York, swinging around those tall buildings, doing exactly what he does in the last kind of like 3 minutes of this film. It's not really a spoiler because there's always the hero shot towards the end of the film. You had it with the Raimi films, you had it with the Garfield films. You always see Spider-Man swinging around New York at the end of the film. I need a film with that. And I don't know, I haven't really thought about who I would like to see him face off against in the next film, but I really don't want it to be the Sinister Six. I'd rather it be more low-key, like this one was, and just have one main villain and have him not just pose kind of like a physical threat to Peter, but also be there to question Peter's intent and his heart and his reasons for actually being Spider-Man, and pose some moral questions towards the character. And I think what they're really in danger of doing here is putting too many obstacles in the way for Peter to protect. There's too many. Is it a spoiler? It's not really a spoiler. Too many people are starting to know who Spider-Man is, and that's a real problem for me now. I know it's probably because they don't want, the same old angsty Peter. Oh, I've got a secret identity and all that kind of stuff. But there's a reason, every superhero can't be like Tony Stark and announce that they are who they are, and that's a real problem for me. But there's nothing that can be done about it now because, the stories have been told. I'm sure they've been plotted out and they know exactly where they're going with it. But yeah, get Spider-Man back in New York. Give him characters who pose moral dilemmas for him, and not just be a one-trick pony and just be a physical threat, because that's not really interesting at this point. But just keep it to one main villain at a time, I think. And then maybe, in a couple of films down the road, then you can have your Spider-Man Avengers moment with the Sinister Six, have them all team up. So, but introduce them each in their own film and then get them to join up at the end. That would be the way to do it. What else? Some of the imagery, when the film actually does, put itself into top gear, some of the imagery that it uses with the, they're not hollow cubes in this, but the hologram tech, or the illusion tech as they call it in this film, once it kicks into that, it is awesome. It's like a comic book come to life. My only criticism is that sometimes when they're doing those kind of scenes, it feels more cartoony because the CGI is overtly obvious in those scenes. Even when, like, he's walking in broad daylight and he's obviously wearing some form of costume, that they've kind of, for some reason, overlaid a CG version of the Spider-Man costume over whatever costume he was wearing. I'm assuming it wasn't a motion capture suit that he was walking around in while he was filming, because there's set pictures where he's actually in a Spider-Man costume. Gotta say, the red and black Spider-Man costume, as soon as I saw that, I loved it, because I remember back in the day when the Raimi films were coming out, there was a piece of concept art that came out if I can find the picture, I'll put it on the thumbnail of this video, or tag it somewhere, or maybe throw it in the Untitled Film Podcast group on Facebook. But Alex Ross did a concept suit. Alex Ross is one of my favourite comic book artists. All of his stuff is kind of like in a painted style, hyper realistic, looks absolutely fantastic, and he's got a very, very retro eye, so most of his designs are very retro, and when I mean retro, I mean it's kind of like, you know, golden age, silver age kind of costumes. Some the more dorky stuff, like, you know, the ears on Cap's cowl, they would, you know, be, you know, the actual little wings and stuff like that. That's how he did it. And it was, the concept art that he did was kind of like a very similar version of what we got in this film. It was red and black, but it had kind of like mirrored dome eyepieces, and the red from the body kind of like went down into a V, and then he had black you know, legs and stuff like that. So when I saw that's what they were doing there, I was like, that's a fantastic piece of kind of like fan service there, because I've always loved that kind of original concept design that they were thinking of going with for the original Raimi films. And, you know, it was probably a little bit too out there, too much of a deviation away from the character's traditional colours, which was a real shame, but I get it. They were introducing the character onto the big screen for the first time, so they probably wanted to go a little bit more traditional, and that's what they ended off doing. But to actually see an approximation of that original concept suit was like a really nice touch, so I really appreciated that, and I think it looks really good. I would like to see him get back into his original colours in the next film as well, but we'll see what happens with that. What I don't want Spider-Man to become is kind of like, you know, the Batman of the MCU. I don't want him to have you know, a suit for snow. I don't want him to have a suit for, yeah, any situation, like a camo suit and all this kind of stuff. Just stick him in the red and blue and leave it at that. There was actually a nice little Easter egg, and again, it's not really a spoiler because it's in the one of the trailers. But when he's on the plane, and there's a shot in the trailer where he's on the plane and they're fabricating the new suit, and on the hollow kind of tech that Tony used to use, you know, when he was picking and choosing elements for his Iron Man suits, a load of different designs came up, and one of them was actually the advanced suit from the PlayStation 4 game, and I like that suit. I wouldn't actually mind seeing that on the big screen. I think that would actually look really good on the big screen. So hopefully, you know, in a movie or two, we'll get to see something like that. But yeah, so the first half of the film, kind of sluggish, like this video. Doesn't really go anywhere, but then once the film actually kicks into the action portion, I had a good time with it. It's not as good as Homecoming, I would say. It is weaker, but that is purely because, you know, like I say, it feels a little bit uneven because they've probably got, you know, an eye looking at 3 films down the future, and they just took their eyes off the one that they had right in front of them, unfortunately. Just took it off the ball a little bit. So, bit of a shame. What would I rate it at? Are we going on the 5 or the 10 scale? Let's go on the 5 scale. And I will say it is a 3 out of 5. Yeah, I think that's fair. 3 out of 5. Just not enough of what I wanted out of it, but as kind of like a light-hearted even, and fun kind of movie to cleanse the palate after, you know, the significant change that was brought in by Endgame. It does its job. It's just a shame that, you know, it just doesn't do its job out of the gate and takes a little bit of time to actually get to where it's going. But there's a lot to like about it. Like I say, Jake Gyllenhaal, the cast in general, apart from, you know, Ned, he's starting to get irksome. And the teachers, oh my god, there's 2 fucking teachers with them on the on this class trip around Europe, and one of them isn't too bad. It's just because he's not in it all that much. But the other one, you'll know him, the one with glasses, he is fucking annoying. I was just kind of like, why is the film wasting my time and its time on this kind of very broad slapstick comedy that is not funny at all. It was like the worst possible Saturday Night Live type sketches. You know, he felt like a character that had come out of like a really bad Saturday Night Live sketch and walked into an MCU film, and I was just like, oh, really, is this where we're going with this now? Less of that, please, Sony. Less of that. And also nice to have a little tribute, just a written tribute to Stan Lee and Steve Ditko at the end of the film, because, yeah, just because. So, yeah, go and check it out. Let me know what you think. This is the second video in the car park movie reviews that I'm going to be doing. I'll probably be doing a few more because, like I say, I've got a week off now, so I'm going to be catching up on a few films at the cinema, as well as trying to repair a fuel pipe leak on the car, and potentially looking for another job. Who knows? So yeah, wish me luck, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again very soon.